It is exactly 5 o'clock, so let us begin. Welcome everyone. This is our climate webinar. I'm Dominika Parry, the founding president of 2C Mississippi, which is a local nonprofit working on both climate education in our state and on climate action. We are your local host, but this is a nationally organized event. It is organized by Solve Climate by 2030, an organization with its mission statement right in its name. This event is taking place simultaneously in 52 locations, 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico. And it seems like we are the only host that is not a university. That's very exciting. At the same time, I'm quite aware that our IT capacity may not be as great as larger institutions. We have speakers in different locations, in different parts of the state, with different bandwidth. So technical difficulties may be part of tonight's experience. I apologize in advance. Now we will begin, hopefully without any challenges, by listening to a welcome statement from our national organizer. Then we will come back to our local panelists and we will have presentations and discussion led by our moderator, Dr. Alan Penman. But first, the national statement.
Welcome to Solve Climate by 2030. Today, universities in almost all 50 U.S. states, Puerto Rico, D.C., and several other countries are hosting state and region-wide webinars focused on ambitious and feasible things that we can all do in our cities, our towns, and states in the coming year to really move the needle on climate change. Here is the most important idea to take home today. What you do locally will change the future. Fact, the U.S. state of Georgia is a top 10 solar state. The neighboring Sunshine State of Florida has very little solar power due to outdated laws and regulations. When we launched Solve Climate a year ago, we could never have imagined that today, entire countries and much of the world's economy would be shut down, with hundreds of thousands of people ill, thousands having passed away, and our health systems overwhelmed. I take that back. We could easily have imagined this. Our health experts and scientists warned us this was coming. After SARS and MERS, they told us this was coming, and yet we didn't take preventive action, we didn't prepare. COVID-19 has shown how fragile our health and economic systems are to extreme events. Our scientists have told us clearly that unchecked, climate change will turn our lives into an unending series of extreme events. Floods, droughts, rising sea levels, pests and disease, more extreme storms and hurricanes, all of this leaving hundreds of millions of people homeless and on the move. We can change this. We still have time to change that future. Last year, the world's top climate scientists told us that we have until 2030, 10 years now, to cut global warming pollution aggressively in order to stabilize the climate at the low end. That warning was the genesis for this national and international discussion today on how to solve climate by 2030. Solving climate in 10 years, that sounds challenging. And yet fixing the energy half of climate change by 2030 is looking more, not less likely than it was 4 years ago. The cost of solar and wind power, batteries, and electric vehicles have plummeted. In many cases, they are less expensive now than the fossil fuel power that causes global warming, and they are getting cheaper every day. Already, utility-scale wind and solar, big solar and wind farms that feed power into the grid, these technologies are crushing fossil fuels in much of the U.S. In Colorado, Idaho, and California, renewable bids are coming in at half the price that the cheapest fossil fuel plants can do. And this is where rooftop solar and battery systems are headed in the near future. On the vehicles front, all the major manufacturers see this coming. Mercedes-Benz announced last fall that they have designed their last gasoline-powered car. Going forward, every new model of theirs will be electric. Combining electric-powered vehicles with the impact of driverless technology, we could see a very rapid transition away from gasoline-based cars to EVs in the next decade. All this progress was the result of a major technology push by national governments. Starting in America in the 70s and then ramping up with the Danes, the British, the Japanese and Koreans, the Germans, and most recently the Chinese and Indians, government policies have brought these industries to scale. And now the market is taking over, and renewables, battery storage, and electric vehicles are on track to deliver power and transportation at prices unsubsidized that will lead to major disruptions of energy markets in the 2020s. Can we get there fast enough to solve climate? Well, this is where you come in. With plummeting prices for renewables and electric-powered transports, the pace of the clean energy revolution will no longer be determined by Washington, D.C. and other national governments. Instead, the core action is going to be in your city, at your electric utility, and in your state capital. The key to solving climate by 2030 will be clearing the path at the local level to rapid deployment of solar, wind, battery storage, and electric vehicles. We need to get rid of outmoded laws and regulations that are holding back the transition. Florida needs to take the lesson from Georgia. It's imperative that we have justice in this transition. We have to make sure that the millions of green jobs that are created are jobs for all, and that everyone has access to clean, affordable power and mobility. Today, in Nebraska and New Jersey, in Idaho and Alabama, in Bangladesh and Brazil, we're going to find out what are 3 ambitious but feasible things that we can do right at home to smooth the path for clean energy and to bring energy justice to our communities. Following the webinar, I hope you will join a group or class discussion about what you can do to make these solutions real. Then, what next? Well, this summer, young people in particular have a terrific opportunity to both support climate solutions and gain valuable job skills in a down economy. The most powerful thing you can do to solve climate by 2030 is to join the political campaign of a candidate who best represents your views on climate solutions. In doing that, you'll also learn how to communicate, you'll gain courage, and most importantly, be part of a creative, strong, powerful vision for the future. COVID-19 is giving us a stark lesson about what happens when we ignore warnings from science. Today, we'll see how 10 years can be enough time to drive the climate solutions that we need, and that the future will be what we make it. Thank you for the work you will do to solve climate.
Okay, so we're back in Mississippi now. My name is Alan Penman, and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. I'm a physician and epidemiologist. I teach at the University of Mississippi Medical Center here in Jackson, and I'm chair of the board for 2 Degrees C Mississippi. Tonight, we will hear from 3 local panelists who work on climate and energy issues in the state. So I'd like to welcome, first of all, Brent Bailey, Mississippi Public Commissioner for the Central District. Since graduating from Mississippi State University in Agriculture and Biological Engineering, he has worked to advance the interests of natural resource conservation, agricultural and forestry production systems, rural communities, and clean energy initiatives. Next will be Katherine Egland, Chairwoman of the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee of the NAACP and co-founder of a Gulf region-based organization called the Education, Economics, Environment, Climate and Health Organization, or EEECHO. She has represented the United States Climate Action Network at United Nations climate conferences in Asia, South America, and Europe, and has represented the NAACP and EECHO globally in over 23 countries. Our last panelist will be Dr. Dominika Parry, who is the founder and CEO of 2 Degrees C Mississippi. Dr. Parry has a PhD in environmental economics from Yale, and she has worked on climate policy issues for 2 decades. However, before we hear the presentations by our panelists, we wanted to share with you what is happening at a municipal level. The Mayor of Jackson is leading comprehensive climate efforts in our city, and he was kind enough to find some time to record a message despite his extremely busy schedule dominated by the COVID-19 crisis. So we will switch now to a statement from our mayor, Chokwe Antar Lumumba, and it'll be read by Dr. Parry.
So unfortunately, I am not Mr. Lumumba. I have his statement. He literally texted us 15 minutes ago saying that they are sitting there with the COVID-19 task force, and the work is taking longer than they thought it would. That's of course completely understandable, and we are happy that he is working on this immediate threat. And in the meantime, I have his statement. While reading it, please try to forget that I'm a woman and I have a Polish accent. I'm excited to speak to you today as a part of the climate webinar hosted by our partner organization 2C Mississippi. My administration is committed to addressing climate justice issues at the municipal level, both through pledging climate neutrality and committing to climate adaptation. And at this point, we are moving from planning to action. We are ready to launch a climate action task force, and two of today's panelists, Kathy Egland of the NAACP and Dr. Parry from 2C Mississippi, are key partners. This year, for the first time, the city of Jackson will count its carbon emissions and work on reducing our carbon footprint. These reductions will improve the quality of life for Jacksonians while sustainably growing our economy. We are developing a systematic adaptation and mitigation plan for the city, hoping to become a leader among southeastern cities by implementing climate solutions. We will achieve this through providing clean energy for all, generating green jobs, and protecting vulnerable communities from climate effects. Moreover, we have already started this work. The New York-based company, Block Power, is conducting an energy audit for the key downtown buildings and developing energy efficiency strategies for us. I hope we even can have solar panels on City Hall. Just this month, we also received a grant from the National League of Cities Leadership in Community Resilience program to develop extreme heat preparedness plan for our city. The humid heat we experience is expected to become even more oppressive in the coming years, and we want to protect Jacksonians from heat strokes. 2C Mississippi and the School of Public Health at JSU are already working with us to designate cooling centers, arrange free transportation to these centers, and provide individual assistance to those in need. We also hope to receive assistance from the NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We've applied to be one of 20 experimental cities where the NOAA maps urban heat islands. This innovative project helps us assess our vulnerability to heat and build more resilient communities through expanding tree canopies and strategically placing green recreational areas and playgrounds. Now, a side note from Dominika. Yesterday, we received confirmation that we got the grant. We have the NOAA grant, and we're going to be mapping urban heat islands in Jackson. That is a very big deal. And this is just the beginning. We want to promote low-income community solar solutions, address sustainable approaches to flood control, and much, much more. I believe that working together, we can not only have the greenest city in the South, but provide a healthier world for all Jacksonian residents. Thank you.
Okay, so having heard what's going on at the municipal level here in Jackson, we will begin our presentations about state level actions in Mississippi. Each of our panelists will present an overview of policies and activities that, if introduced at the state level, could become game changers for climate action in our state. Our first speaker is Brent Bailey, the newly elected Public Commissioner for the Central District, who brings a valuable perspective as a Mississippi Republican passionate about renewable energy. Brent, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Penman. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to visit with everybody today, and I'm going to try to get my my slideshow up. I need a little assistance in screen sharing there, Ms. Dominika.
You need an assistant to, so do you mean, would you like me to project your slides?
It's not letting me share my screen. It's disabled. So I need you to enable that for me.
Okay. Just 1 second. How is that? Excellent.
There we go.
Apologies for technical difficulties.
No problem. All righty. All right, can we view my slideshow there?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Coming through, you hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
All righty, well, hey, I appreciate the opportunity to join everyone on the panel today, and I hope this is a useful set of information that we're going to provide for you this evening, and will be used multiple times over in various classroom and other settings as we continue to look at what are the opportunities here in the state of Mississippi regarding policy matters, technology, consumer awareness, and building those types of constructive cooperation amongst state, federal, local, municipality, and as well as those advocates around the state who really want to do what they can and put their heads together and help solve climate by 2030, as well as advance clean energy opportunities here in the state of Mississippi. So I just want to take the opportunity to kind of get things started to bring forth some issues and let's see. Just to kind of get things started, to really talk about setting the stage and where we are in Mississippi as far as our energy consumption, utilization, our efficiency, things like that. So, you know, just bring us up using the most recent information I was able to pull together. So Mississippi is 13th in per capita energy consumption in the U.S., while we have the 19th lowest average price of electricity. Really good, way below the national average of 12.79 cents kilowatt hour. The average Mississippian pays 11.12 cents kilowatt hour. We have however, we do have the fourth highest electricity consumption per household at 1132 kilowatts an hour. We also have the 10th highest average monthly total residential electricity cost. And when you pair that with us being number 45 of the nation per ACEE's state energy efficiency scorecard, and we're the only southeastern state without a statewide energy building code, that makes us the 11th most energy expensive state in the nation. When you look at the fact that we rank 50th in per capita household income, our energy burden, the share of energy that we pay out as a percentage of our monthly household income, is one of the highest in the nation. But there are solutions, there are opportunities, but we have work to do. When you think about the renewable energy generated in the state, we're only about 2.9% of all electricity comes from renewable resources, with the bulk of that being from biomass-based fuels. And we have the second highest motor fuel consumption per capita. Because we have the cheapest fuel, some of the cheapest fuel in the nation. We are very mobile as a state, we're very rural, and we travel a lot. But as we think about some of the statistics that we just showed, not all bad, but we have a lot of work to do. Despite the fact that only just under 3% of all our energy is derived, or all our electricity is derived from renewable resources, there's going to be a lot of opportunities going forward. We're going to add to that mix because we do have a need to diversify our energy resources. We're a very natural gas heavy state, and we see there's tremendous opportunities to diversify our fuel resources. We also understand that there's a lot of older assets in the state, or in Mississippi as well as in the Southeast. And a lot of these baseload resources will be retired or taken out of service in the near term. And as a national goal, we used to have a lot of desire to be energy independent. And by embracing the clean energy resources we have, whether it's wind, solar, our domestic resources, our natural resources, we can do that. And as mentioned in the video at the start of this process, we heard that clean energy is becoming very cost competitive. As the costs continue to come down, they're very competitive with our traditional fossil fuel resources that we're most familiar with. And the good thing about it, a lot of the technologies to integrate distributed generation are becoming better every day. Utilities and the transmission networks are understanding that, forecasting better weather, able to integrate that into the overall system. But all's not rosy, and we are going to have challenges. And we've got to have a combination of good state and federal policy to go forward to help develop that sustainable pathway of integrating clean energy resources into our overall energy portfolio. We can do some work at, my agency, the Public Service Commission. And I do want to mention, we do a lot of work directly with utilities on their matters and helping them to integrated resource planning, determining what is the best path, most cost-effective energy resources going forward. But we also, you hate to say need it, but natural gas and the extremely low prices we have do present cost challenges with renewable energy. But with reasonable economic incentives, there are ways to overcome these. And I do want to state that being a commissioner in the Public Service Commission, the policies that we're talking about here today, and then I'm going to discuss, is not necessarily that of the Public Service Commission. This is certainly myself and my years of working in clean energy advocacy and natural resource conservation, really my views and perspectives, what I think are some viable opportunities going forward. So there's a lot of, as you heard in the opening dialogue and video, clean energy policy certainly dictates how we're going to go about in developing, deploying clean energy to help address climate issues as well as energy diversity matters. And there's a lot of things being done around the Southeast and around the nation, things like renewable electricity standards that determine what percentage of energy we believe will be derived from renewable resources for businesses, consumers to utilize. As we see with RTOs, there's a lot of policy in regards to how transmission is cited and financed and how those costs are allocated amongst customers. There's definitions like what is renewable biomass. I know there's feelings on many sides of the aisle on the utilization of renewable biomass, but even at the federal level, there's over a dozen different definitions of what renewable biomass is. And that prevents challenges both for renewable biomass growers and providers and those that wish to utilize that resource. We talk about land use issues, how that impacts whether it's indirect or indirect causes of how land shifts are influenced by energy. We continue to battle with fossil fuel subsidies and the growth of natural gas. And of course, with the COVID outbreak, we're definitely going to have challenges in next year's budgets. And that's going to be seen at many of the states and even at the federal level. And of course, how impacts of regulations, both at the state and federal level, guide utility decision making will certainly continue to play out. And we always got to make sure consumers are getting the best information they can and are aware of what these opportunities are. But one thing I'm going to talk about, that key issue that I'm going to share with you is talking about tax credits here in the state of Mississippi. There are federal tax credits for production and investment taxes, and those are going away, will be expiring. What's the opportunity for Mississippi to pick up that baton and provide those incentives for our clean energy providers, installers, developers, and consumers here in the state of Mississippi? So a tax incentive is nothing more than a dollar for dollar reduction in income tax you owe. And the credits that are accrued by you can be used in 1 year, rolled over in multiple years. Unfortunately, there's no tax credits that exist in Mississippi to incentivize deployment of clean energy, particularly for individuals. However, as I mentioned, there are federal clean energy tax credits, and those are what we tend to hear about most. The production tax credit has typically been used by the wind, geothermal, and biomass industries to offset the production or to get credits for the production value of each kilowatt hour, megawatt hour generated. For most of the last several years, that's been around 2.2 to 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour. However, that began to ramp down and actually was to expire at the end of 2019. However, the Fed, Congress in their latest appropriation extended the PTC at a reduced rate through the end of 2020. But the one we're probably most familiar with, particularly in the solar side, is the investment tax credit. And that's particularly used, as you hear, the 30% as what's been pretty common over the last several years. As you'll see, beginning through an agreement and a compromise back in 2016, it set a pathway for phasing out the state or the federal investment tax credit that has been used by residential as well as businesses to help incentivize construction and installation of solar. So while up until last year, when you could claim a full 30% off your federal tax liability for projects, this year you can only get 26%. Next year be 22%. And in 2022, the investment tax credit for residential fully phases out to zero. However, for commercial and utility, will still be able to claim 10% federal deduction. So we see certainly an opportunity here, because there's no doubt tax credits have done tremendous things to help grow solar throughout the country. It has helped drive down the cost of installations through the economies of scale and also out of the out-of-pocket expenses of homeowners. And that has certainly helped stabilize the commercial environment for installers and manufacturers and help them reshore and build those components, whether it's panels, whether it's racking, whether it's inverters, et cetera, to do that manufacturing here in the U.S. And it's certainly helped diversify our energy portfolio, and key that plays out and reduced emissions from our energy system. And probably, one of the things I'm certainly as commissioner, I want to give greater choice to consumers, help them be more efficient in the energy they use, and help them have greater choice in the energy they wish to consume. So as we talk about, the opportunities, as I mentioned, the federal is on the way out, federal tax credits. There is talk of what's called a phase 4 stimulus bill at the federal level that could put tax incentives back in this. There's no guarantee. There's going to be a lot of politics involved, and also there's just many factors going to occur. But it doesn't mean that there's not opportunities here in Mississippi. And we've had these conversations around solar tax credits in the state before, all the way back to 2012. There's been efforts to implement some form of solar tax credit for residential and commercial businesses. However, we've never been fully successful in getting that implemented. But that doesn't mean there's not opportunity down the road, because whether it's a personal tax credit or a corporate or a commercial tax credit, we see examples of those in states all around the nation. And that has led to the installation of over 2 million solar installations in the U.S., well over 2 million now. And we were on track before the COVID outbreak to hit 3 million in 2021. But if you look at the current installation situation, as I said, over 2 million in the U.S., that's about 45,000 installations per state. However, in the state of Mississippi, we have less than 900 solar installations. There's a lot of opportunity to invest in clean energy here in the state, diversify our energy portfolio, and utilize solar to generate part of our energy resources going forward. A lot of people say, why solar? Isn't it expensive? It's unreliable. It's intermittent. Well, I tell you what, with new technologies to integrate that, to store the power, there's a lot of things we can do here to create and get the full value of solar and distributed generation. And the good thing about it, a lot of people don't recognize how valuable a solar resource we have in the state of Mississippi. Mississippi's tied for 10th in the nation in solar power potential, according to NREL's Renewable Resource Data Center. And I've even seen studies where many cities in Mississippi have better solar installation opportunities, a better solar index than many cities in the Southeast outside of Texas. So we have a lot of opportunity to embrace solar here, do it cost effectively, incorporate it into our system. So we have a lot of opportunity here. We have jobs we have 847 full-time jobs, 362 part-time jobs in the solar industry in 2019. That was an increase over 2018 and was projected to grow again. But we got to be realistic about the economic impact that the COVID-19 has had on Mississippi. And even across the nation, there could very well be a 40% decrease in solar activity this year. That's going to lead to a lot of jobs that's going to be lost. There's about 250,000 solar jobs in the nation now, and we believe we're certainly going to see a loss there. And because of the loss of income, there's going to be reduced spending on solar for the rest of this year, we imagine. But a state energy tax credit, while it may be a heavy lift in 2019 based on the delay in the legislature and the time frame they're going to be up against to create a budget before the next fiscal year, before July 1, this is certainly an opportunity, a policy pathway we can look at down the road for the next year or two. Because, what do you do with taxes? If you want to reduce something, you tax it. If you want to grow it, you incentivize it. And a state tax credit can certainly be that stimulus to help grow solar in the state of Mississippi, create new jobs, give consumers that choice, and create a new industry for the state of Mississippi. So I appreciate the opportunity to share those views with everybody, and I hope you find this information useful. There's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out anytime if we can be of service, not just myself, but also the Public Service Commission. We want to help consumers do the right thing, utilities, provide a diversified energy portfolio, and be of service to the constituents of Mississippi. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brent, for that great overview. And thank you for your support and interest in leading our state towards renewable energy sources. Our next speaker is Kathy Egland from NAACP and EEECHO. Kathy will share with us her social justice perspective on climate action, a perspective shared by many Mississippians. Kathy, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Brent, for giving us an overview of our demographics. Now let's break those numbers down by race. Do we have my slides up?
Just 1 second, Kathy. I'm having another difficulty. It does not allow me to share.
Okay.
I have no idea why that happens.
Dominika, I think you need to take back the controls from me.
Okay. I'm taking back the control. It doesn't let me do anything. I can pin you to a video. Candace, if you can hear us and help, that would be great. Somehow I lost control as the host.
I also don't have control as the host because I had to rejoin. So that's amazing.
Okay.
I can do this without, in the interest of time, I can certainly do it without the slides.
Kathy, how about you start and I will do my best trying to figure out how to be able to share your slides.
Sure. And thank you so much, Brent, again, for giving us an overview of our demographics. And I'm going to break those numbers down by race. Why? Because despite the tremendous strides we've made in race relations, the reality is that there are still systemic injustices and inequities which must be taken into policy considerations. As you can see, well, maybe you can't see, but Mississippi has a minority population of over 41%, with African Americans comprising almost 38%. Looking at our population by gender, we have a higher percentage of females and significantly high populations of children and elderly. Now, Mississippi ranks highest in poverty with the rate of 21%, with 1/3 Blacks and 1/4 women living below the poverty level. Many people who work full-time in Mississippi still live in poverty. Almost 1/3 of Mississippi's children under the age of 18 lives in poverty. Home ownership versus renters pretty much correspond with the poverty rates. And this is important when we look at factoring and look at this into our clean energy policy making. So it's also extremely important to note that despite these grim statistics, a disproportionate amount of the income of Mississippians is spent on energy. Many times people must choose between medicine and energy or food and electricity. Our state is still dependent on fossil fuel and has been resistant to safe, carbon neutral, renewable energy policies that could eliminate some of the health and social economic factors that contribute to policy. So we are making strides in that with new elected officials. The NAACP's groundbreaking cold-blooded report analyzes and ranks 378 of the nation's coal-fired plants. The report concluded that coal is killing low-income people of color. More African Americans live near coal-fired plants, nuclear power plants, than any other demographic group in the US. We must have policies in place to protect all people. And policies must be mindful of the disproportionate health impacts of energy production on our most vulnerable populations and the energy costs which strain their budget. We must protect those who have contributed least to climate change, but have been most adversely impacted. And we can do this through fairness and equitable access as we move towards a just transition to a new energy economy. Now, the NAACP has compiled a wealth of research and developed numerous resource guides and toolkits, including our Just Energy Policies and Practices Compendium Toolkit. I'm on slide 11 now. Now, the compendium itself is 538 pages, but it covers all 50 states. The toolkit is not as large, but has comprehensive step-by-step policy approaches that can be used by anyone in any state. A very good resource guide. And the NAACP believes that everyone has a right to safe and affordable energy. Unfortunately, energy companies in the energy industry do not operate under this principle. And on our next slide, we simply cannot continue with regressive policy failures which allow for the continued reinvestment in fossil fuels. The $7.5 billion squandered on the Kemper County carbon capture sequestration failed experiment would have been more wisely invested in renewable energy. You've heard our stats. This plant was built on the backs of the poorest of the poor in our nation. If you do the math, the $7.5 billion divided by approximately 187,000 ratepayers equals about $40,000 per household. At that cost, everyone in South Mississippi could have had solar and battery. What a waste. So we need net metering policy incentives, not penalties. Energy companies have waged successful campaigns in states around the country to attach a fixed fee for solar users. They claim that the fee is needed to maintain the grid. Having such a fee would grossly undermine incentives for solar usage. It's really an attempt to maintain their profits. True net metering would allow for the democratization of our energy usage because the competition would generate choices which would lead to lower energy costs. Phasing out fossil fuels would allow ratepayers to have cleaner air and water, better health, and a safer climate. But above all, it could mean that excess solar production could be sold back to the grid. That's right. We could be energy subcontractors, and instead of sending a check to pay for your electric bill, you will be receiving one from your energy provider for the excess solar that you produce. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, of course, such a prospect of fossil fuel companies sending checks back to ratepayers does not sit well with them. So they have stooped to tactics that are as reprehensible and as dirty as the coal they use. They have the unmitigated gall to go into the communities of vulnerable populations and engage in class and race baiting. They play on the fields of the disadvantaged with their lies, deceit, and misinformation, such as they claim that net metering is a subsidy for the rich at the expense of the poor. They've used this propaganda to successfully influence policymakers in other states. It is the height of hypocrisy to have pawns used as pawns, the very population that they disproportionately harmed with their deadly, dirty energy. And the NAACP has released last year on April 1st, the Fossil Fueled Foolery report, which goes into detail about the top 10 deceptions of the industry. Now, we need everything on this list as it relates to policies, but at the top of the list, we need transparencies. Companies should be required to be transparent. Our local energy provider was mandated by our Public Service Commission to provide energy efficiency to vulnerable ratepayers as a condition of a rate increase. However, they purported to the community, especially faith leaders, that they were providing the insulation and other energy efficiency services from the goodness of their hearts. They pretended to be just good corporate neighbors and who wanted to help, but in turn, people are unwittingly beholding to them and willing to write letters of support when they are shrewdly petitioning for their next rounds of requests of favorable rulings. So we must have transparency up front, and we cannot believe the hype. And so thank you very much. Please feel free, here is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out and contact me for any additional information.
Thank you, Kathy, for a very important and inspiring presentation. It's clear that social justice concerns are absolutely central to climate and energy policy. Now we will hear from our last speaker, Dr. Parry, who brings a unique perspective to this discussion as both an economist and as a non-native Mississippian. Dominika?
Now I am unmuted. Apologies again. Eventually, I will become fluent in Zoom. And for now, let's talk about a policy that could be proposed for Mississippi, and that would be a game changer. For my perspective, that would be carbon pricing. Given that I'm an economist, it's not a surprise. But before I get into the carbon pricing, let me just say that I truly wholeheartedly agree with the need for solutions proposed by the previous speakers. We definitely need incentives to promote solar energy in the state. And we have to work on making it affordable and available to everybody. Along these lines, I would also want to briefly add that I'm hoping we can not only improve the existing net metering regulations, but also extend it to make it virtual net metering. And just one sentence about what that is. Virtual net metering allows group ownership of solar panels by several entities that could be co-ops, neighborhoods, apartment buildings, and along with the group ownership, we need to be able to share the credit produced from generated but unused energy, and that credit needs to be shared among the user owners of the panel. That solution, virtual net metering, is crucial for establishing community solar in the state. The city of Jackson and 2C Mississippi are hoping we can start several low-income community solar projects, but we can't do it without virtual net metering. So this is on a short list for us. Having that said, I still want to focus on carbon pricing and point out that carbon pricing not only strengthens incentives for solar, but extends the same incentives across all renewable energy sources. On the top of that, it also provides incentives to innovate, and if properly said, can also boost economic development, and again, if properly said, can actually protect vulnerable population. It is an example of what Commissioner Bailey was saying. We need economic incentives to move Mississippi forward. Carbon pricing is one of those solutions. I don't know how Commissioner Bailey, what is his position on carbon pricing? I'm not saying anything, but this is definitely an economic incentives that could help all energy, non-renewable energy sources. So how does this work? Carbon pricing addresses the fact that climate change is a result of market failure. Probably everybody heard about that. This market failure is called externalities, and producers of energy from fossil fuels do not pay all of their production costs, right? Part of this cost, the external cost, is imposed on other parties, in this case, on all of us, the whole globes. These are the climate change damages. Now, these costs are already pretty well monetized, partially, but it's a good start. This is a study that I really like. It came out in 2017, and it is a county level monetization of damages resulting from climate change by the end of the century if we do nothing. The sectors that are included in it, as you can see, is agriculture, crime, coastal storms, energy demand, human mortality, and labor efficiency. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There are other sectors that are not included, so think about it as the lower band of the estimate. Then look at the map, and remember that the darker, the worse it's going to get, the darker red. And when you look at Mississippi, and I wish I knew how to point with a pointer, but everybody knows where Mississippi is. Look at the counties. There are many counties where we are expected to lose 20 to 25% of county level GDP. County level GDP, think income of a county. That is staggering. Now, if we introduce carbon pricing, fossil fuel production will be responsible for covering the external costs. They will be practically internalized, and polluters will be required to pay for the damages they cause. So what happens after you make producing fossil fuel more expensive? The prices of energy from fossil fuels will be higher. And when most goods get expensive, not all, but most, we buy less of them. Consequently, we lower CO2 emissions, and in a way, we are equalizing the field for renewable industries, which for the whole time had to pay the full cost of production, and because of that, they appeared comparatively more expensive. So carbon pricing is a very general concept, and it may be implemented using a variety of mechanisms, but all of them are market-based. We are fixing market failure through a governmental intervention that is necessary, but that intervention can vary in size. And there are some solutions that allow the intervention to be very, very small. This specific solution I want to talk about is revenue neutral carbon tax. This aspect of fixing market, using market, should be very appealing to a large majority of conservative population in Mississippi, and is also very appealing to large business. Many people are not aware that all of these presented companies and many, many more are officially asking for revenue neutral carbon tax, because in comparison to other solutions, this is what is definitely preferred by them. So on one hand, we have support for revenue neutral carbon tax from huge fossil fuel companies and in general very large production firms. At the same time, large support from environmental institutions. We have Natural Conservancy, Sierra Club, Conservation International, too many to list, that agree that this solution should be tried. So in addition to being carbon revenue neutral, we also want to make sure that that tax increases gradually. This is important because it allows producers, those firms, to make adjustments, and as a result allows them not to bankrupt. This is in contrast to regulations. Regulations are introduced, and the next day after they are introduced, they need to, the reductions need to happen. That very often is very difficult for businesses. Getting a gradual tax avoids that problem. We also have a large majority of economists agreeing that this is the best solution, including several Nobel Prize winners. This is a solution that is good for the environment and is not detrimental for the economy. So now, what does it mean that it's really revenue neutral, right? The tax revenues do not go and become a part of the governmental budget. In other words, we do not grow the government. Another thing conservatives, especially in Mississippi, really do not want to see. But instead, we are actually promoting economic growth. The revenues from the tax could be neutralized, right? Carbon neutral could be neutralized by, at the same time, lowering other taxes. So we either we introduce carbon tax and we lower other taxes, or we remove some other taxes. That's one solution, but there is one which is better. And I'm a big personal fan of that solution, which is taking the revenue from the tax and returning them to households, giving people monthly checks from carbon. This solution is crucial for our state. It's very important for the whole country, but it's crucial for Mississippi, where we have so many low-income communities. They are already disproportionately affected by climate change and are very likely to be disproportionately hit by a regular tax. If the money collected through the carbon tax goes back to households, families receive extra income. What that means, it allows them to cover the extra expense caused by the tax. Remember, if we impose a tax on fossil fuels, it would increase prices of fossil fuels, and that means it would trickle down, the actual trickle down effect, where prices of practically everything will go up. This burden will be most felt by low income, of course, because the overall increase in prices will be a relatively large percentage of their household income. And it's gonna be much larger than in the case of high income households. So these carbon checks not only help covering the extra expenses and protect lower income people, but they also work as a stimulus, as an economic stimulus. How? This is a great time to talk about it, despite its tragic side. We just had a stimulus package offered by the federal government to stimulate the economy drastically affected by the COVID-19 crisis. This is the exact same mechanism where we take place, that will take place if we impose carbon tax and send the money back to households. How does it work? Most people, when they get extra cash, they spend it. What they usually spend it on, and this is from research, on manufacturing. They buy stuff and on services. Both manufacturing and services then get a boost. And these are two leading sectors of the economy that overall will provide an actual economic stimulus along with climate protection. So carbon neutral tax, I am having trouble speaking. Carbon neutral tax with carbon checks is a solution that I personally prefer. It punishes polluters it promotes renewable energy, it provides incentives to innovate, and on the top of that, it boosts the economy. Well, Mississippi, what's not to like? And look, we like it. This is another interesting study, very recent study from Yale University, where again at a county level, I love county level data, we see people's attitude toward carbon tax. The darker orange red, the more support for carbon tax. Again, I don't know how to use a pointer on Zoom, but if you look along the Mississippi River on the Mississippi State side, and in the central part of Mississippi, you will see that we already have a pretty substantial support for carbon tax. So there's more good news. This solution of a carbon tax that is revenue neutral and the revenues are returned to households was realized at a federal level, first introduced 2 years ago and then last year again at the federal level in Congress. In the House, it was HR 763, and in the Senate, it was S 3791. It's called Energy Innovation Act. It's a bipartisan bill that was introduced by a Republican from Florida, Southern Florida, probably because his district is going underwater, and then co-sponsored by a long list of Democrats, including our own Benny Thompson. After Benny Thompson co-sponsored it, we reached out to our mayor, Lumumba, who endorsed it as well. What's next? Now we have to start talking to our conservative friends in Mississippi state legislation and hope we can come together with a bipartisan solution. And hopefully we can do that before our districts start going underwater. These are my hopes and dreams for Mississippi. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Dominika. Very interesting. I just wish I had a magic wand and I could just wave it and make it happen.
We all do. We are working on the wand.
Okay. Well, now we'll begin our time for questions and answers. So for those of you listening or watching, please, if you have any questions, type them into the chat room or the chat box, and we will do our best to get to them. I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions to the panelists, and these are questions which are being asked everywhere to all the panelists across the nation in this simultaneous event. So thinking caps on, first question, how as just ordinary people, students, people in the community, whatever, how can we be involved personally in helping to advance some of these solutions that you've all proposed? And I'll start with maybe Brent, you want to start that?
Sure, I appreciate it. So how do you get young people involved? Well, it's to certainly attract them to the issues at hand and have them hopefully understand what the long range opportunities are as well as the long range impacts of inaction. And there's a lot of, I think, similarly passionate people around the state of Mississippi, and it's helping them get connected to those folks. As you heard in the open dialogue, the challenge was to get involved in a political campaign, to get involved on a local issue and take ownership of that and help create change in a certain way. And, it's just really helping folks find that connectivity and hopefully helping them gain a win, achieve something, and see what those achievements, those actions turn into. And there's tremendous opportunities. We've seen it in other venues here in Mississippi and around the nation. And I just hope that through these types of interactions that we're having here this evening, more of them hopefully we move beyond the computer screen and into one-on-one or big group conversations around this, and help incentivize and initiate some excitement around these issues here in the state of Mississippi.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Kathy, is anything you want to add to that? How do we get people involved?
Well, I will say definitely information, education, mobilization, and legislation. So people, you know, there's all types of information. We've got information on our website. You have, I'm sure there are many environmental and climate justice organizations at every level and in every community, and you should get involved. Students definitely can mobilize at their schools. I know school is out during COVID-19, but certainly, you know, you can take all great movements began with one person. It began with small groups, and they can grow.
Okay, and Dominika, you're still muted. Do you want to?
I am unmuted myself.
Okay.
Now I'm getting better in this.
Any thought?
Well, I completely agree with everything that was being said. What can I add? Well, I think that what was being said, I just want to rephrase it. We should all remember that we are in this great country that is a democratic country. And the principle of the democracy is expressing your preferences to those who represent you. If you don't tell them, they will not know. They don't want to realize their own preferences. They want to represent you, because otherwise they will not get reelected. So do that. Try to figure out a way of writing letters, making phone calls, connecting with organizations that do advocacy and lobbying. If you need contacts for local organizations, you know me, please contact me and I will help you out, find a group. We do that on a regular basis. This is very empowering, and the more voices they hear, the more likely they are to engage in an actual conversation. Having that said, there are also different actions at campuses. I understand that large part of the audience would be students, and different universities have different ideas of what to do about climate, starting with simple actions like trying to make sure that in cafeteria they don't serve beef, which is really bad for climate. Two solutions that are extreme and probably would be hard to realize in Mississippi. Yale University is pricing carbon. They have a Nobel Prize guy who won Nobel Prize for this idea, so that's kind of easy for them. But they actually set up a pricing scheme, and they try to figure out how it works in practice on doing it with different departments and different individual buildings. So if you are interested in solutions, contact any of us, and we all will be able to help and connect you with people who could help.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Let me go on to the second question, which is kind of connected to that. How likely are some or any of these proposed solutions, how likely are they to become reality in the near future? Brent?
Oh yeah, so I spent part of this evening talking about tax credits and incentive programs, and that's just one tool in the policy toolbox. And if people want an idea of what all is out there as far as state and local policies, there's the database for state incentives for renewable energy, the DSIRE website. And folks can go on there and look at what is being done all across the country at the state level, as well as local level, of various policy mechanisms to help incentivize and drive renewable energy investments, incentives, research and development, and helping really move the industry forward. So in the state of Mississippi, there's no doubt it's going to be a heavy lift. And it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of different people who are passionate about this and understand the opportunities it provides, and really those who can help project the long-range view. of what energy diversification means, and in creating an industry here in the state of Mississippi that gives greater choice and opportunities for consumers, and help them understand the economic turnover that creates at the local level, job creation, et cetera. It's really putting all those pieces together and frame it up as an interconnected economic driver for the state. And I just believe we're going to have to continue to frame policy options in that economic frame for our policymakers at the legislature and others to have the information they need in the political environment that we exist in to move forward with these types of policy options.
Kathy, any other thoughts? How do we, how close are we to, getting anything moving forward?
I think certainly as it relates to information, people are more aware, and we have more commitment. That awareness is brought about more commitment, and also there's more determination. And those are powerful combinations. You have powerful groups coming together. We might not all agree on everything, but we do agree that we must transition our energy use. And, you do have, as Dominika mentioned, the ears of our politicians are open. I don't know if that was the case even 10 years ago. So we have made some tremendous strides.
Mm-hmm. Dominika, anything you want to add to that?
Well, so I think that realistically speaking, we have great chances for getting extended tax credits. Very, very helpful. We can have net metering to become more like the net metering in other states, where you actually get a serious compensation for the energy you produce. I think we have a great chance of transitioning, extending that to virtual net metering. How far we could go in a short period of time, that's another question. The solution I was talking about seems not anything we can immediately accomplish or even propose right now in the state of Mississippi. Carbon pricing is still, I think it's just deeply misunderstood and becomes a polarizing issue. If we have more conversations where we can, in a safe place, explain the details, share frustration, I think the hope is that in the future we can start seriously talking about it as a solution for Mississippi. But of course, we are not there yet. Our governor, newly elected, has a pretty obvious stand on his approach to climate change. It's not an issue he wants to get involved with. He doesn't see it as a serious problem. So that's very disappointing. But again, everything depends on how active we actually are. If we get it together, if we start talking, who knows?
Dr. Penman, I just want to add to that, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think everybody on this panel, and I'm sure the folks listening out there, we all have a common objective, and that common objective may be several years out. But I think we all have a different, while we may all have a different pathway of getting there, we all want to end up in the same place. And whether that's just energy policies, whether it's creating more manufacturing and economic development in the state, whether it's emission reduction and natural resource conservation, whether it's energy diversification, whether it's giving consumers more choice, it's understanding what that pathway is, embracing it, and working collaboratively amongst many of these partners around the state, and preventing that common front and coordinating our messages. As Ms. Dominika said, while our governor may not embrace the discussion around climate change, he certainly embraces discussion around economic development, expanding manufacturing, and creating jobs. And if you frame it in that, and with the other policymakers that may have interest in these other areas, you get them on board as well, you bring everybody to the table and you create a united front on that. Those are ways that we're going to get these policy recommendations, these policy ideas that we permitted, that we brought forward this evening going forward.
Yeah.
Yes, if I can add one thing, Alan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Brent, exactly. We all need to get together. We need to remind ourselves where we overlay, that we have the common goal and how to approach it. What I also want to point out is that as federal government seem to be inactive currently at the climate action and energy action, we move to the state level, and it works in different states. Ours, let's just put it out there, is not very active in it either. We move even lower, which is municipal action. And we already have municipal action and commitment from the city of Jackson. What I'm really hoping for is that we will develop solutions that are economically viable and they bring actual monetary quantifiable benefits, which then we can use as an example. Once you show that it actually works, that it can be done, it doesn't ruin the economy, it actually helps it, we can reproduce those solutions at different municipalities and eventually start proposing it at the state level.
Mm-hmm. You know, with the, we're in a very difficult time, obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I have to say, some of the responses to it have been quite remarkable, particularly at the state and local level. You know, whether it's communities mobilizing to make masks, or states organizing to get ventilators, or, you know, industries being repurposed at a national level to make ventilators and stuff like that. It just shows you when there is both political will and public will that, you know, the society can really respond. And that's a lesson, I think, which, you know, is encouraging for climate change. I hope we never get to a position where we have to take such rapid, drastic action. But, you know, time is not infinite. We're running out of time to really make big changes. So I hope we learn from this. I don't know if any of you, let me just pause and say, I see we do have a number of attendees listed. And if you're watching or listening, I encourage you to type any questions you have into the chat box and I'll read them out. We'll wait and see if we get any questions there. But let me ask the panelists meantime, are you concerned that in any way that after the COVID-19 passes over and settles down, are you concerned about the sort of rebound that we might get, which will drive emissions up? And, you know, manufacturing is going to go up again. Consumers are going to be buying stuff because they want to and need to, but it might have, you know, bad effects on carbon emissions again. I'm just putting that out there. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, this is Brent. I'm sure that, you know, the economic turndown that we experienced in 2007 to 2009, I'm sure there are some lessons learned and what we may gain from it as far as what energy demand may entail now and what the growth curve may look like over the next several years. But there's no doubt that, you know, that was kind of definitely a recessionary period. And with this shut in place across the nation, it's certainly going to impact economics here. And it's going to, you know, we're not driving as much, not using much fuel. We've seen that in the impacts in natural gas and other fossil fuels. It's also going to make possibly the utilities rethink their demand curve for the rest of the year or their purchasing needs. But it's also that folks, now we're working from home, some people that was forced upon them, we may find that, hey, we can accomplish things and do it more efficiently. And that may create a difference in energy consumption patterns going forward, which could have an impact on, you know, the emissions profile of the state. But I think that still remains to be seen as far as how long this this COVID situation goes on, what that means for public interaction going forward. We certainly hope that we can get through this. constructively with as little loss to life and property as possible, and come back with a very strong economy. But we hope we come back with a very strong, efficient economy. We want a very bright, vibrant economy. We want jobs, there's no doubt about it. But I hope we think in a manner around sustainability and efficiency that keeps more income to ourselves, and hope that in our local communities. And we just hope that this opportunity, as we're at home and kind of learn from ourselves and each other, that there's a more sustainable approach to business as usual in the coming years as we get through this.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, yes, Kathy.
Yes, I was going to say COVID-19 will forever change the way we do business, the way we live our everyday lives. The fact that we did not heed the warnings of a possible pandemic, we ignored those warnings. First of all, I am hoping that people will take another look at the climate crisis and will be able to take away, have something to take away from that. We have scientists who have been given these warnings. We have seen the science. And so it could be possible that we could take another look at that, and we will be able to understand the urgency and the consequences of not tackling the climate crisis. That's one of the things that I think would be a very important takeaway. The next thing is, one thing that we must do is we must learn to get away from putting ourselves or having ourselves in the mindset that we have to choose between economic and our environmental and climate safety. We can have a safe and secure climate along with a healthy economy.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, if I may add, I think that what we've been observing recently, I'm sure everybody is aware that the emissions went dramatically down due to the shutting down of economies, right? The prices went down with it. So now it's going to come back, but hopefully we will learn something important. The response that we are seeing is clearly driven by the immediacy of the threat. What climate change needs is appropriate communication of the urgency of this problem. This is not, we can't wait until people drop dead on the street, because by then it's going to be too late. We need to figure out a way of talking about it that would bring the same alarm that we managed to create with COVID-19. What I was initially worried about was this very webinar. How could I now introduce people and say, hey, let's chat about climate change when people are literally dying? How can I go and ask the mayor, hey, would you like to make a statement? But the truth is, I think after the initial shock, we stop and think that there are so many parallels that we could learn how to react to this crisis and use it in a preventive sort of way. If you think about our governor's reaction, initially, he was quite dismissive up to a point where he wasn't. Let's figure out how that works and get him and get our state legislation to that point on climate as fast as possible.
Okay, well, I don't see any outstanding questions, so I think we can wind this down. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Commissioner Brent Bailey, Kathy Egland of the NAACP and EEECHO, and Dr. Dominika Parry, who's the CEO of 2 Degrees C Mississippi. I'd like to thank them all for sharing their unique perspectives with us. And of course, to thank all of the audience members for joining us tonight. Each of you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar and to additional teaching materials provided by Solve Climate by 2030. Of course, if you are interested, and we hope you are, in local initiatives around climate and energy, please contact us, 2 Degrees C Mississippi at, you can email us at 2cmississippi@gmail.com or go to our webpage, www.2cmississippi.org. Thank you, thanks to everyone, and wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so
so
much.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Okay.